Well, welcome to Rugby Borough Council's Planning Committee meeting this Wednesday the 15th of March. I'm Councillor Tony Gillis, the chairman of this committee. The meeting is being web streamed to the public through the Council's YouTube channel. During the meeting, when asked to speak, please use the push button to talk on the microphone in front of you. This will allow the camera to pan in your general direction and everyone to hear you. Before we begin the formal meeting, I'm obliged to read out the following fire notice. There is no fire drill scheduled in the building this evening. If the fire alarm sounds, then please could I ask you that you make your way out of the building, down the main staircase and out of the main doors of the Town Hall and congregate at the entrance to Caldecott Park. An officer of the Council will give instructions on when it is safe to return to the building. Moving on to the agenda, the first item of business is to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of February. Can I have an agreement on that, members? Very okay. That's unanimous. Okay, that's approved. Anybody got any closed circuit radios or up the top? It's just we've got interference on the sound. They're all off. Okay, so someone's got something, electrical device or something that's causing interference.
No, it's just your microphone, I think.
Is that okay now?
I think it's just your microphone.
I think we're okay now. Does that sound all right to you? Sounds very clear.
Yeah, it's your microphone, I think. So.
Can we live with that? Or do you want me to use a microphone? That's better, isn't it? Always expect the unexpected. That's it. Brilliant. Right, we'll continue on with item 3 on the agenda, and that is... sorry, we've missed item 2, which is apologies.
2 apologies for this evening from Councillors Eccleston and Mrs Hassel. Their substitutes respectively are Councillors Mrs Roberts and Mrs Timms.
Thank you. Now we can move on to item 3, declarations of interest. A, non-pecuniary interests. Councillor Sanderson.
50 Windsor Street. It's in close proximity to my own dwelling.
B, pecuniary interests.
Sorry, agenda item 4, Ward Councillor for applications R210985, R152117, R220637, R220664, R220665, R220666, R220772, R221055.
Thank you. We move on to pecuniary interests. No pecuniaries. And then C, notice under Section 106 Local Government Finance Act. We're all clear on that one. We'll now move on to agenda item 4, which is applications for consideration. But before we do that, we will just run over the rules and regulations for speakers. First, the planning officer will speak and present the application. The representatives for the objectors, the applicants and then the ward councillor will each be invited to speak. After each speaker, committee members will be asked if they have any points of clarification from the speaker. Any ward member or councillor who speaks on an application as part of the public speaking process shall leave the meeting once all speakers have completed their presentations relating to it. Members of the committee will then go into debate on the application, asking relevant questions of the planning officer if necessary. A formal recommendation will be made and voted upon. The rules for public speaking. Speakers will have 3 minutes to make their presentation. They'll be warned by a short alarm when they have 30 seconds left, and then a further alarm will sound when their time has expired. Their presentation should then be brought to a halt. No extra time will be allowed. All speakers should direct their presentations to amplifying the planning matters they have previously put to us for the benefit of the Planning Committee. Speakers should restrict their comments to material planning considerations only. Any non-planning issues will be disregarded. Speakers should not introduce any additional information that has not been previously brought to the planning authority's attention, i.e. introduce late items that have not been suitably considered by officers and properly addressed in the officer's report to Planning Committee for members' deliberation. No visual aids or handouts may be used, and no questions to officers or members will be allowed. No members of the public are allowed to take part in the debate once their presentation has been given. So in that case, we'll move on to the first item on the agenda, which is R22/0657 Rugby Central Shopping Centre. And we've got Chris Kingham and Sam Green to present.
Thank you, Chair. This is a full planning application relating to part of Rugby Central Shopping Centre on North Street in Rugby. The application site is shown on the screen before you, edged in red, and it relates to this part of the shopping centre. The application is for 2 development blocks. It would comprise of commercial units to the ground floor and 200 apartments to the upper floors. The proposal also includes provisions for a pedestrian street through the centre of the development between the 2 development blocks. To give you a better illustration as to what that looks like, we have an aerial view here, again with the application site edged in red. So you can see we're actually here in the town hall, and it's just this part of the shopping centre closest to us that we're looking at tonight. And again, this is a 3D model that the architects have prepared that shows the application site as existing, so you get an idea of the scale of development there in relation to the existing townscape within Rugby. So the application site currently houses 17 units, and of these 8 are currently vacant, and that equates to 47% of the units within this part of the application site that are currently vacant at the moment. Members are more than likely to be familiar with the site, but just to recap with some images of the development as is. You can see here, obviously, the shopping centre that we're looking at tonight. And again, on a view down North Street, it's this building here. This is the Napier building, and the shopping centre just drops down in height in this location. You see, this is the corner of what was formerly the Argos store. And then again, a closer view of the existing frontage along North Street. And then a view just from the mini roundabout at the bottom of North Street. Looking, you can see the kind of smaller units that front along there, and McDonald's in this location. And just a final view of new look on that frontage there. So basically, the existing shopping centre is very much of its time. Obviously, with 47% of units being vacant, it warrants a question as to how to deal with that site. And therefore, it's important to look at the design context of this particular location, to look at the opportunities for development and also the constraints. So the architects have gone into a great deal of detail looking at existing uses, looking at the variety of scales within the town centre, and looking also at the relationship with heritage assets. So we have the conservation area in this location, and the pink coloured buildings are listed buildings, all within close proximity to the development site. They've also looked at contextual materiality, So looking at the elevational treatment of existing buildings, what materials are used, looking at the detailing that's used, and looking at the relief that's given to buildings, and seeing essentially what's in that surrounding area within the town centre that can influence development that can come forward on this site. They've also paid particular attention to key views to ensure that the development maximises the opportunity that the site presents. And essentially they've created this 3D model that they've used to explore a variety of different options. This model that you see on screen before you shows the differing building heights, the darker blue buildings being the taller buildings, and then the lighter blue showing buildings that are of a higher scale than the existing shopping centre, but obviously lower than the tallest in the town centre. All of that is fed into a constraints and opportunities plan. So that's what you can see on screen before you. Looking at really things like the existing service yards and the accesses onto North Street for those, looking at the pedestrian permeability, looking at key views coming into the site, and obviously making good regard to the heritage assets that are within the vicinity of the site. And that's led to a particular design response. So they've looked to firstly re-establish the street line along North Street. They've looked to redevelop connections. Obviously, the existing shopping centre, once it's closed, means that there's no chance of permeability through there. So they've looked to open that up with a pedestrian street that would be accessible at all times. They've looked to crank the blocks, so it's these sort of L-shape designs to maximise that frontage onto North Street. And also, rather than just having one continuous linear line going into the site on these wings, it does basically revert inwards. There's also an opportunity to respond to the wider context. So they've looked at the scale in particular. So it's 6 stories at the front on North Street, then rising to 7 stories going into the site. And they've looked again at this permeability, ensuring that the site makes the most of the opportunities to lead to connections into the wider area. So members were last seen this scheme when the applicants did a pre-application presentation, and basically it started off as this stage 1 here. So it's 7-storey development across the entirety of the buildings, and that led to these sort of higher elevations on North Street. And members raised some particular concerns and issues and offered some positive feedback as well as opportunities to tweak the design, and that led to this submitted version here that retained the 7-storey height throughout the 2 blocks. And as you can see there, this is the Napier building. It led to this sort of projection above that build line, and it was quite prominent within the street scene. That led to some concerns being made by Historic England, and it also led to some concerns from ourselves as well from a visual amenity perspective. We therefore worked with the applicant and the architects to come up with an alternative scheme that was much more sympathetic to the area, and particularly the heritage of the area in relation to the conservation area. And that led to the development of this 6-storey apartment blocks and commercial units to the ground floor on the North Street, and then rising into the 7-storey. As you can see along the street scene, it sort of ties in much more neater with the existing built development from the town centre moving down as you go out of North Street. You can see here just some more close-up versions. We went from this was what was originally submitted to this amended scheme here, that much more flush finish on the ridgeline. And again, this is a view from Caldicott Park, just near the town hall here, looking towards that corner. This is McDonald's, and the development was sitting in the background of that. That was it at 7 stories, and then reducing it to 6 stories on that North Street wing, successfully just drops it to a more acceptable level, particularly in relation to the 2-storey building of McDonald's here. You can see here, this is a view looking into the site. You can see, we'll come on to some of the design detailing in a moment, but essentially you can see there was some key elevational changes and tweaks that have been made in response to some of the particular issues that members raised, just to ensure that it breaks up the massing of the building and is of the highest quality. So that's led to the final submission that we're considering tonight, which is the proposed design. As stated, there's 2 L-shaped blocks between 6 to 7 stories in height, the height stepping up from North Street going into the development. You've got a pedestrian street re-established through the centre of the 2 blocks here, and the aim is to achieve a very high quality public realm. You've also got a widened footpath along North Street, and you've got a very distinctive character created with strong frontage and enclosure. You've got large windows to the residential apartments and commercial shop fronts to the ground floor with large areas of glazing. You've got architectural detailing to the elevations, high quality materials, and on top of the North Street wings, you've got some communal gardens for residents of the apartments to use. So overall, we feel that the proposed design responds to the context of the area successfully. It integrates with existing buildings, and it capitalises upon an opportunity to create this east-west link across the site here. And particularly as well, it doesn't prejudice the potential redevelopment of other parcels of land around the site from coming forward. And it's been shown that that could integrate successfully with other redevelopment schemes if they materialise. To the ground floor, there are proposed to be 11 commercial units. There would also be facilities for residents, so that would include things like bin storage and cycle storage, and critically there would be 1 cycle space per apartment, which is in line with the council's guidelines. There'd also be other communal services and facilities within those buildings there. But as you can see, the commercial units are active onto the edge of the site, facing the public areas. Then to the upper floors, we have 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. You can see those here. Now the size of those apartments meets the nationally described space standards. They comprise of open plan living areas, they contain storage areas, and they also have at least 1 bathroom for each bedroom. The public realm itself creates this pedestrian street through the middle, which would incorporate tree and landscape planting. There would be high quality hard landscaping, benches, bins, anti-terror bollards and seating, visitors' cycle stands, and a feature sculpture of a design to be confirmed post-submission. And then this is just a little bit more detail showing the 2 communal gardens for residents to use. That's located here and here on each block. So just going to show you some illustrative views to try and bring that to life a little bit more. But essentially the design is very modern and contemporary. It follows a London vernacular style, but it does incorporate details from the local area. So that's looking at the particular things like stringer and soldier courses, the use of parapets, deep reveal depths to windows and doors. And what it's sort of led to is the creation of 4 distinct visual elements across the facade of the building. So you've got large glazed shop front windows to the ground floor, and then above that, and then you've also got these fretwork panel details here, and these are inspired by the Sir Frank Whittle jet engine, therefore trying to make this link with the history of Rugby. You also got these structural bays created across the elevations, and then you've got bronze cladding panels, you've got patterned brickwork, and you've got full height apartment windows, aluminium window frames, and there's 2 brick colours that are used. All of this we consider is of very high design quality that will successfully make the most of the opportunity that redevelopment on this site presents. So here's a key view from Caldicott Park, looking south along North Street. And again, looking north along North Street. And now I'm just going to hand over to Sam, who's just going to run through a couple of the issues that we've picked up in assessing the application.
So moving on to some of the harms, the Napier building pictured within the slide would be sited 10.8 metres away from the proposed southern block. The development is within the town centre, and considering the spatial context, closer separation distances are expected in this location. In turn, the proposal would create a privacy loss for 8 apartments within the Napier building. Amendments were considered to alleviate this impact. However, due to site constraints, visual impacts and commercial viability, none of the amendments could be accommodated. Therefore, there is a harm to be weighed within the planning balance against the proposed benefits of the development. In terms of the impact upon heritage, it is first considered that the proposal has been reduced in scale through amendment in consideration of its heritage setting. The application site is located within the Rugby Town Conservation Area, and in comparison with the existing shopping centre and by means of sustainable and good design of the proposed development, it is considered that the proposed would have a moderate benefit to the setting and a minor beneficial impact to the significance. The Grade 2 star listed Church of St Andrew's spire would be less apparent in some of the minor glimpse views from a west and northwest position, is circled in images on the slide. It is considered that this impact would have a minor adverse impact on the setting, with negligible adverse impact on the significance. This results in less than substantial harm, in which must be weighed against the benefits of the proposal within the planning balance. Moving on to viability, the proposal is deemed to not be viable, which has been confirmed by independent verification. The developers for the site have offered contributions which cover all of secondary education and the health requests. The viability impacts do, however, result in no affordable housing being provided by the proposal, as well as more pressure on play and open space. Warwickshire County Council do accept no contributions in regard to non-secondary education, libraries and road safety funding. However, these impacts again must be weighed against the proposed benefits within the planning balance.
So turning to the economic benefits of the development, this is obviously a town centre regeneration site. It's the first privately funded major town centre scheme in many years. It reverses a trend of stagnation and decline and vacant units within the town centre, and it's critical to the Rugby regeneration strategy, which the council has just adopted. Of key significance is the fact that this could actually be a catalyst to further redevelopment. It shows what's possible and it creates momentum to deliver further benefits and opportunities for redevelopment. It's also considered that the proposal would benefit the vitality and viability of the town centre. You've got commercial units to the ground floor, and these would attract new businesses to them, and it would also drive more footfall to the town centre, which would benefit existing businesses as well. 200 apartments within the town centre location would result in new household spending. It's estimated that this would be about £1.5 million worth of additional spending within the town centre, and that would obviously help with the viability of local businesses, services and facilities. In terms of jobs, the commercial units would lead to 98 jobs being provided for people, and in terms of construction, you would get both direct and indirect construction jobs being supported, as well as the creation of 21 new construction jobs. There would also be some social benefits. Obviously, 200 apartments within a brownfield town centre site is very significant, and in particular, it would significantly boost the supply of new homes. It's in a highly sustainable location, and it's therefore considered that this is something that should be attributed significant weight in the planning balance. In terms of the built environment, it's clear as well that the proposal would lead to the enhancement of the town centre. It would offer a very clear visual improvement to the existing development, and therefore we feel that's something that needs to be weighed in the planning balance in favour of the scheme. A range of other matters have been set out within the committee report, and there are no detrimental impacts for a range of issues subject to conditions and obligations, as you'll see on the agenda. Turning to the planning balance and looking at the options for the site, the approval would realise all the benefits that have been highlighted today, but refusal would mean the shopping centre would remain as it is. Its high vacancy rates, currently 47% vacancy rates. It would continue a trend of stagnation and decline of that shopping centre and the town centre as a wider body, and it would also result in no investment or economic benefits within the town. There would also be harms to the regeneration ambitions of the council, and it would dent investor confidence. It would mean that 200 dwellings would not be delivered. However, on the reverse, it would mean that the identified harms to heritage, privacy, and the impact arising from a lack of some contributions and affordable housing wouldn't arise. So turning to the question as to whether this is sustainable development, we feel that yes, it would be sustainable development, that the benefits outweigh the harm, that the harm from not realising the benefits would be cumulatively greater than the harm identified. The recommendation is therefore one of approval as set out on the agenda. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks for that, Chris and Sam. We've got points of clarification. We've got no...
Yes,
Councillor
questions
Sanderson.
to the officer. When we had the pre-application presentation, the applicant gave the impression that they would be looking at angling the bus stops to ensure that bus users could have better use. However, in the report, they actually call for some of the bus stops to be removed from the site. And that makes in terms of their wish to have a car-free environment, it's removing a mode of transport, or it's reducing a mode of transport. I also note in the report that they expect Rugby Borough Council to make up the shortfall of parking by offering Newbold Road car park as a facility. Is that for the exclusive use of the 200 households that are going to live in the flats and the staff that goes to be employed at the premises? Can the officer clarify where we are with these transport elements?
Certainly, thank you, Chair. It's in terms of bus stops, there's obviously 2 bus shelters currently in front of the existing shopping centre on North Street, and the proposal is seeking to potentially remove one of those shelters but amalgamate the services into the remaining bus shelter. Effectively, it's not reducing the number of buses coming to the site, it's a reduction in shelters. Now, Warwickshire County Council have looked at this in particular and kind of observed, well, does that mean that there's going to be people left standing on the pavement without shelters? And that's why we've got a condition on the planning agenda to look at that finer detail as to whether it could be an enlarged bus shelter or the potential relocation of the existing bus shelter just further up adjacent to the existing one, so that the kind of capacity under cover would remain the same. But just to reassure, the level of bus services would remain as is. And
Is the officer aware that those particular stops don't have the step down for the buses for those people with disabilities to get on and off them? At the moment, they're chucked off the buses at Clifton Road and have to find their way to the prime retail area. But what about this thing is zoning our council car park for the exclusive use of the people who will be residing in the houses, in the flats, and using the shops?
Yeah, that's not something that's proposed. So in terms of parking provision, it's a car-free scheme. You've got Rugby Central Car Park, which is obviously owned by the applicant. That's got 550 spaces, multi-storey car park. That's the closest car park to the site, and does offer season passes that future residential occupiers could use, as well as shoppers as well. And then you've got Westway Car Park further afield, which is obviously a council-owned car park that offers long stay car parking passes. The Newbold Road car park, to my knowledge, is only short stay car parking, and therefore isn't an option available to residents. So there's the only potential that we have is there's a car club that's proposed to be created for the benefit of future occupiers, and the location of where that car club would be established needs to be confirmed. But we're only talking a very small, minimal number of spaces that would have to be agreed through the details to be presented to the council at a later date if the scheme's approved.
Is that what you're looking at on Newbold Car Park? Is the car club?
No, so there's no proposals currently being explored for Newbold Road Car Park in connection with this development.
Okay, thanks for that, Councillor Sanderson. Councillor Lawrence.
Hello. Thank you very much for the quality of your report. My question is around the 200 dwellings and their suitability for people with reduced mobility. Could you just please advise me on that?
Yeah, so the issue of accessibility by people with reduced mobility is a key part of the building control regulations that the developer has to comply with, and it incorporates things like needing to ensure that the width of doorways are a certain size, that corridors within the between the apartments are of sufficient size for people to get into and manoeuvre, and these are all standards that are particularly regulated as part of the building control approval, and the applicant is aware of that. There is a section 7 of the design and access statement that looks particularly at that issue and ensures that it has been incorporated into the floor plan layouts that you'll have seen tonight. As well as that, it's worth mentioning that there's obviously a lift within the apartments that provides residents with an opportunity to obviously get up and down to the different floors without needing to utilise stairs, for instance.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you. Councillor Willis.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Chris, for the presentation. And indeed, thanks to Councillor Lawrence for the point he just raised. That was once something I did want to raise. Part of my role at the County Council has been leading an extra care housing programme, Housing with Care, where I've applied 5 principles to development. Accessible, thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Acceptable, probably more of that later this evening. Achievable, affordable, and available. Number 4, affordable. I'm very, very concerned at the viability issue or lack of viability issue, and appreciate the report has got the review mechanisms in there. But in that role as Housing with Care, I can think only in Rugby, and we delivered 1,000 units across the county, where in this chamber, permissions have been granted and developments have not gone forward. In the town centre, Herbert Gray, I liaised, negotiated with Stephen Ladyman at the time at Oak Retirement, and indeed the follow-up to that, and we still have an empty spot in Rugby there. Ashlawn Road, Inwood's House, again, permission for a care home and Housing with Care granted, nothing has happened. The extra care housing programme started with Farmers Court down on the cattle market, Bartique Limited, huge master plan to bring that forward. Unfortunately, one weekend, Bartique went bump, and we were left with a site that is still progressing development. Can you just please reassure members and those watching in the gallery and indeed on stream around the viability, affordability issue? Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, so basically we've worked with the applicants through the pre-application process right the way through to tonight, and particularly with the architects as well. just looking to ensure that we've got a scheme which is deliverable. And as an example of that, the initial scheme included provisions for the entire top floor to be set back from the front elevation, but the cost of doing that was extremely high, and on a scheme that's already unviable was found to be obviously of quite a big significance, needing to warrant to a design change to eliminate that additional cost. So it's just to reassure that these sort of considerations have been looked at to make sure that the scheme is of a viable and deliverable level. And I think it's particularly important just to be aware that the applicant is expecting between now and the completion of the actual units for the viability to improve over time. So they've looked at things like construction costs, which everyone is probably aware are obviously quite high at the moment, but their evidence is that those construction costs are starting to fall, and contract costs as well are starting to fall as well. So they're confident that that will improve. They're also confident as well that the value that they can obtain for the apartments will be higher in the time when they've completed them and that they're seen. And all of that sort of creates more favourable conditions for the viability of the scheme to make sure it's actually something that is deliverable. And in the background of this as well, it's important to note that the existing shopping centre is currently loss-making for the applicant. So they're actually experiencing quite a significant loss because of the number of vacant units. And therefore, the option of just doing nothing with the site isn't something that's feasible for them. And coupled with that as well, they've obviously owned a lot more of the land, so more of the existing shopping centre and the multi-storey car park. So therefore, they're really keen and invested in ensuring that they've got something that is deliverable, that they can use to then show what's possible on the other development parcels within that area. So yes, it's something that they're aware of and have tried to ensure that the design is something that will be delivering and will get off the ground.
Lovely. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just a reminder, we're on points of clarification still, and we've got Councillor Mrs Brown next.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the presentation. My question's about air quality. Given you've got 6 storeys going to 7, and there is a potential for a building of that size in that particular sort of configuration there to hold fumes, what's being done to ameliorate that?
So the issue of air quality for future occupants of the residential apartments has been looked at in a lot of detail. One of the key things is the ventilation strategy to those apartments. So it's using mechanical ventilation as a primary means of cooling and ventilating those apartments. So it's basically without the need to open windows wide open, for instance, and lead to that significant influx of, say, fumes from the bus stops and such like along that frontage. And then they've also incorporated the tree planting along North Street and particularly used tree species that are designed to capture some of the particles that you can get, particularly from vehicular emissions along North Street. It's just little tweaks like that that sort of cumulatively help to improve air quality, and our environmental health officers have confirmed that they're happy that there wouldn't be any harm to future occupiers.
Councillor Mrs Roberts.
I had to do extreme rapid reading, so I might have missed 1 or 2 points, and thank you, Veronica, for helping earlier.
Sorry, Councillor, could you just move your microphone around so we can, that's it.
Yeah, I've got a few concerns with it, though I think it's a good project to go ahead. The first one I have is, have you done a study of the disruption during the building, the construction happening in the town centre? And the other one, and thank you, Neil, for Councillor Sanderson to raise the parking issue. My concern is we've talked about a club, a car club, and all this, but there is no significant plan or description of how this is going to happen. You know, when somebody will buy it, they might think, yes, all this will happen. But how do we get a cooperation between whoever buys these apartments to start this on? And a lot of people will buy, and they will know there is no parking, but later on they will start complaining to the council that we don't have any parking. Because to buy an apartment, I would say, people still need to work, and they might be working far away. And yeah, it is accessible to transport the facilities in town. However, a lot of people will be working away from Rugby, so then they will have to depend on the car. That's, for me, that is a big concern, because people might still have cars and they will be parking it elsewhere in the area, and this might cause problem between other residents or whoever is already have access to parking. So this is one of my big concern, and it's also about the health services. I have seen that there are some proposed money to be given to the health authorities or services for increase, but are we going to get increased bed or the accessibility that the resident of Rugby will have with Coventry and Warwickshire Partnership or UHCW? So these are my concerns. And again, going back to parking, is these people are not a single unit. They will come with family, with friends. So people might be coming and visiting from other area. Where would they park? And also the bus services, they will end at a certain time. And if we want, and these apartments, I'm assuming would be for younger people. Younger people have got a late night lifestyle. So how would they move around and be mobile? So that was a few of my concerns. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just touch on the construction point first, and then Sam will pick up the other point. So for the construction phase, we've got a construction and environment management plan condition that's set out on the agenda that particularly deals with that issue. It ensures that they're adhering to best construction practices, and it also requires them to submit details of how they manage everything from the movement of delivery vehicles associated with construction and demolition, how they deal with the dust, the noise, air quality, a range of factors. And when we get those construction environmental management plans, we consult all of our key technical consultees, including environmental health and highways, and ensure that it's a robust document. And obviously we're particularly mindful in this location, being in the town centre, that the potential impacts could be felt more keenly by a variety of different businesses and residential uses. So it's something that we've kind of confident that we've got covered through that condition.
In terms of the car club, that's something I explored with the applicant, who were quite engaging with myself and the internal consultees to sort of explore the avenues we could go down. Unfortunately, during the time constraints of a planning application, we didn't manage to tie all those points together, which would have something fixed to say the car club will go here, this is how it will operate. That is safeguarded under the Section 106, the legal agreement, and will be explored and sort of tied up at that stage. But the applicant was definitely engaging and supportive of that scheme being put in place for the car club.
Right, it's Councillor Srivastava next. I missed him a bit earlier, so it's now your go.
Thank you very much. Thank you, very nice report. I just have point 12.4. The proposed development would not contribute towards meeting the retail needs identified in local plan. How this is going to be sustainable? in the future, how it's going to affect development. Obviously, their local plan has identified certain things, and that this proposal would not meet that. So what is the future?
The local plan sets out the need to ensure that the town centre viability and vitality is protected and increased. At the moment, obviously, the local plan's formed at a point of time and catches a snapshot as to what retail studies at that time showed was a potentially feasible within the town centre. This scheme seeks to essentially consolidate the retail development and enhance it to meet the needs of today. So it's ensuring that obviously at the moment the evidence is there that 47% of the units are currently vacant. They can't attract the right sort of businesses to those units, and indeed units are moving out of town to elsewhere. And so there's this sort of stagnation and decline that's happening, and it's how then to tackle that. It's looking at creating very high quality units that are of a size that are attractive for potential business occupiers, and having that kind of free pedestrian access going in means that they have the ultimate control as to when they operate and kind of don't have the constraint of the shopping centre closing at a particular time, for instance. So it's all about creating a much more attractive and vibrant town centre location that will hopefully lead to that vitality and viability increasing over time, which is consistent with what the local plan is seeking to achieve.
Thank you.
Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. I've been here long enough to have seen a number of applications come through on that site and the adjacent site. 2 from Clock Towers and 1 from an agent when we might have got a Morrison's, but we ended up with a McDonald's. There's lots wrong with this scheme. It's not up to the standard of the other schemes that were put forward.
Mr. Sanderson, is this a question of clarification? Let's have the question.
Looking at putting a public house in the bottom of one of those units when there are 3 empty public houses within 100 yards of it.
They're looking at putting that in because that's something that they feel is a need within the area. It's certainly something that the scope of the Rugby regeneration strategy is seeking to diversify the mix of uses. We're also talking, it's only 1 unit that they're seeking to actually.
Right. So we're quite happy for another empty pub.
It's not. It's creating a unit and an opportunity to do that. There's a condition on the agenda that sets out that we are asking them to submit all the different use classes for the different units that are on the scheme. Obviously, when the applicant progresses that, they'll go out to the market, see what actual appetite there is there, and at that point, they'll obviously make a decision.
Chair, on the original scheme, it was on the 2 clock towers applications, that site, the lower sites, were recognised to have a leisure and recreational use, not a public house use.
Right, we've got a question from Councillor Bill Lewis.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. There's 200 apartments being built and none of them are being classed as affordable. We've heard earlier that construction costs are reducing, making the scheme more viable. Does that mean that there's more chance of there being some affordable properties?
Yes, so there's a viability review mechanism that's inbuilt into the Section 106 agreement that would provide 2 opportunities to relook at the viability of the scheme. So if things have improved to such an extent that the scheme becomes viable, then at that stage we can look at the range of contribution requests that have been received and also the need for affordable housing to decide if there's potential scope to provide something like affordable housing. So there's an opportunity, and obviously if things change favourably for the developer, then the prospect of that happening increases.
So the council would encourage the developer to introduce affordable accommodation.
So that issue is whether it's accommodated on-site or a contribution is made off-site would need to be made. There's obviously various complications in providing affordable housing on-site if it's of just a limited number. But that's where the Section 106 agreement and that viability review mechanism will give us that scope to have that negotiation, to have that conversation if that arises, and we can look at the best solution for the site, whether that be on-site provision of actual units or an off-site contribution.
Thank you.
We've got Councillor Slinger next, then we'll move into debate.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation, Sam and Chris. Councillor Lewis has got there first, really. Unusual. Usual, actually. Regarding affordable housing, I appreciate your clarification on the chance to reassess the provision of affordable housing on the basis of a study of the viability at a later date. But I do think it's important to note that local residents are likely to be concerned that there are no affordable units, particularly when we're talking about some one-bedroom units, and there is a demand and a need for those. So I would be grateful to know if particular, is the word pressure or advice can be given to make it very clear that we're minded that we do want to see some affordable housing if it's viable. That's my first point. My second point is, was any study made or thought given to the cultural amenities in the excellent space that's included within the plan, whether some public staging, stonework, or use of that space, because it's such a definite boost to the town centre, as far as I can see. It's very impressive. So any clarification on that would be very gratefully received. Thank you.
Yeah, so absolutely we note the desire for affordable housing, and we'll be sure to take that into account if it materialises that the scheme becomes viable. In relation to the, is it the public realm that you're sort of concerned with? Isn't it? Yeah. So so the kind of quality of that, the hard surfacing, that's part of the kind of key aims of the application in a way, is to achieve something that's of high quality, that's going to ensure that it's visually very appealing, and it also provides a space for the public to use. So it's the incorporation of things like benches and the art sculpture that's being sought. All these sort of details will come forward via the conditions and be considered at a later date if members are minded to approve.
If I could just come back on that, Chair. Thank you. Thank you. Regarding the public realm, spaces where artists and performers can perform within such a wonderful space as is shown on the mock-ups, I think would be appreciated, given all the work we're doing to encourage people into the town centre. So if that could be noted as well, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Right, councillors, we'll move into debate. Who wants to go first? Councillor Mrs Brown.
Thank you, Chair. It's really impressive. I love the idea of that mixture of residential and a destination. And it's the quality of the destination, I think, that there are a couple of dependencies here, and that's one of them. So a destination that's about performance, as Councillor Singer has pointed out, or about display, or something that we haven't already got that will make it special in a way, a special destination, I think would be really helpful. The biggest dependency for me is the one about cars. I think that this will stand or fall on the quality of our transport system in the town. And at the minute, some of it leaves a lot to be desired. So if you've got 200 new units and people are expected to share vehicles, hire them out, depending on when, it's not always going to work like that, is it? Because those people will want their own cars and will want to put them somewhere. Particularly if the transport system stays as it is. So, I mean, they're my two major concerns, the quality of the destination that's on offer and the impact of a pretty poor transport system. I'm worried about that. I'm thinking really carefully now about those two things in this context. Perhaps others will be able to persuade me that that we're on safe ground with both of those. Thanks.
Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. As I said earlier, I have seen a number of schemes on this site come and go. Clock Towers put two proposals forward, as did Morrison's for what is now the McDonald's site. The public haven't forgiven us for that one, by the way. My concern is this is a below standard application. This is about maximising the profits for the developer by turning it from a retail area into a housing block. Now, I'm all for living over the shop schemes. I was involved with one of the first ones in Regent Street, and I've supported them in High Street and Sheep Street. But none of them have been this big, 7 stories high. That's like Byatt Place, Myson House and Cell Block H all rolled into one and put plonked on the end of our main primary access point into the town centre. In fact, if you actually went onto the application rather than the officer's report, you will see there is a comment there from English Heritage, which says that the proposed development will dominate the character of the conservation area to a considerable degree. The scheme is overscale and potentially damaging to the significance of the conservation area on the non-North Street, which forms one of the key entrances to the town centre. In terms of sort of Napier House, it will mask much of that. I'm trying to think of the word. It's Art Deco building. It will hide it because if you look at the two scales side by side, this building is bigger. It's more bulky. It's bigger mass, and so Napier House will disappear. They've tried a bit of environmental bling by putting a few trees and shrubs up on floor 6. They've got to be very hard if they're going to survive up there. And I feel that they could have done much better. How is it viable to build 200 private flats, but not viable to give us 20 or 10% toward affordable social housing? It doesn't add up economically. I say that that's a primary concern. Transport. We were promised that we would get better bus stops for those poor souls that have to line up on North Street in that wind tunnel that we've got there now. That's gone. In fact, they now want to remove some of the bus stops. Again, it's that question of if you're going to have zonal parking in the area, tell me where you're going to have zonal parking. Don't scratch your head and hope it's going to just turn up, because it won't. The other scheme was mentioned earlier, Caldecott Square, and getting that sorted out in terms of parking was hard enough. But this one has no real basis to sort out the problems that they're going to generate. So on those grounds, Chair, in terms of its form, scale and massing, this scheme is not acceptable, and therefore I move refusal.
Okay, we've got Councillor Daly next.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to start by thanking the two officers for their incredibly detailed report in what is a seriously major scheme for this town centre. I'd just like to start by saying I am disappointed by the lack of affordable housing. I'm sure we've all read about that in the local press recently. That is disappointing. We should be having 20% of those flats should be affordable. That's what we expect. That's what our local plan says. However, the independent viability study has been done, and I don't feel I'm in a position to question that. I am happy, I think, with the viability review mechanisms, and that if we do see an upturn in the economy and in what these flats can be sold for, then we might see a greater return in that respect. I do have another concern about parking, and when we had the presentation last year, that was one of our main questions was about the parking. I do, however, appreciate these will be sold as no parking. And the Napier building, which Councillor Sanderson just referred to, that when they were converted into flats, I believe they don't have parking either. And I guess with it being in a town centre location, with being so in the town centre, I think we just need to monitor maybe if these do go ahead the impact on parking in the Benward streets around. I think though most of those roads do have parking permits, which these flats wouldn't be eligible for. So we just need to monitor that. But I do think these will be sold as car-free flats, as the report says. I do think we need this development actually in our town centre. We are losing, I think, 2/3 of the commercial floor space on that wing of Clock Tower. Rugby Central. Of Rugby Central will be losing. But they are, as Chris said, the 48% of those units are empty. And actually, we've got an enormous look at the Argos unit. Argos doesn't really exist in town centre high streets anymore. They've all moved inside Sainsbury's. And I think being nimble as a council and rather than having 16 1970s, 1980s units, I think actually what we need is 11 smaller units that can be taken on by independent restaurants or independent coffee shops or smaller units. I think that is the future of town centres. Socialising, meeting together, maybe coming to watch a performance in the central area, as suggested by my Labour colleagues. So I actually will move approval in line with the officer's report on this. I think this is a fantastic development and a fantastic opportunity for rugby. It is disappointing in some ways. I can't deny that. However, I think this is what town centres, us and other places, need to be doing if we want regeneration. And I don't think it doesn't look like a 1979 built shopping centre is going to cut the mustard anymore. Thank you.
Got any further speakers? We've got one. Councillor Slinger.
Thank you, Chair. I would second that motion to approve on the basis that the design itself is very impressive. It enhances the town centre. I believe it's a far better outcome than leaving the existing Rugby Central centre to decline, as was said by the officer. It does provide shopping space. It does provide a public realm amenity. I would like, though, that, and I seek the guidance of the officers on this, that an advisory can be put on that if it's possible to enhance what's already in there around affordable housing, just to state on the record the feeling of, I believe, the whole of the planning committee, that we do want, wherever possible, affordable housing in such excellent developments as this, so that people from our community can afford to live there, as well as people coming into our community who are, of course, welcome as well. So those, with that said, I'd be very happy to second the motion.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Just on the affordable housing point, because I know it's mentioned by a number of colleagues, it's just a reminder and a refresher that we're kind of hamstrung by government policy on affordable housing that lets the viability review process take place and reduce or negate any affordable housing on site. Affordable housing is dealt with through the Section 106 agreement. The detailed terms of that and the detail of the viability review mechanism is yet to be negotiated. So we will wrap those points up in those discussions if that's acceptable to you. And that's already kind of covered off in the delegation to officers under the agenda report. But we will be sure to pick that up with a noted preference for on-site deliverability over off-site contributions.
Have we got any further speakers? Councillor Mrs Roberts.
I agree with this development because I think that despite the big concern with the transport and the car park and, well, the parking system, with these new resident in, I think it will throw some life in the town centre. It will bring more commerce and the standard of the shopping experience in Rugby. So I would be voting for it. Thank you.
Councillor Willis.
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, I mentioned the 5 A's. Accessibility, yes. Acceptable, yes. Achievable, hopefully. Affordable, to be confirmed and available, and I too will be supporting the motion to approve.
Councillor Lewis, did you want to?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think obviously the town centre needs improving and a lot of work, but I don't know that this is the right scheme to do that. I agree with a lot of the negative points that have been mentioned, and I'll second Councillor Sanderson's refusal.
Okay, in that case...
Just a quick one while you're still in debate. Can an informative... Should this get passed tonight, can an informative be put on the recommendation regarding not removing access to public transport by the loss of the bus stops?
I don't think that would be... Well, we got...
Yeah, through you, Chair. Councillor Sanderson, the difficulty, I suppose, is that the bus stops and that provision is something that is done through Warwickshire County Council. It's obviously outside the scope of the borough, well, the applicant with regard, they don't obviously necessarily control them, so they would have to negotiate with the Warwickshire County Council, and it obviously appears that that is something that will take place anyway with regards to whether the bus stop is going to be enhanced, as enlarged, one of them, and what I suppose that design will take. So I suppose we're mindful of what you're saying, but I think it's difficult for us to put informative on because I don't think it's something we can actually ultimately control.
Well, you could express a concern about them removing the bus stops.
I mean, obviously, we've said that. I mean, I just don't want to give you sort of false hope by putting an informative on which, you know, sort of saying that, you know, we may not be able to retain it.
Right, we're going to move to the vote now. So we've got a proposer and a seconder for approval. All those in favour, please show. And those against, please show. So that was 10 votes for and 2 against. Thank you. So that application is approved. The next application to be determined is land at Padge Hall Farm, Watling Street, Burbage, and presenting that is Ella Casey.
Thank you, Chair. This application is for a hybrid planning permission. It's an outline application for all matters reserved except for the site access from the A5 for the demolition of the existing structures and the erection of B2 and B8 industrial buildings, and a full application for Unit 1, which is a B8 unit, including ancillary offices and associated associated access, hard standing, parking and landscaping. It's a cross-boundary application with Hinckley and Bosworth and Nuneaton and Bedworth, and it's an EIA development. This application was heard previously at November committee, and it previously had 2 reasons for refusal, and it was deferred to resolve the highways issues. The application site is located to the southwestern edge of Hinckley, adjoining and immediately to the southwest of the A5. The southern boundary of the site is defined by the Birmingham-Leicester railway line, and to the west of the application site lies the urban area of Nuneaton and includes the A47, which connects through to the A5 to the north of the site. The site is surrounded by agricultural fields to the west, and Harrowbrook extends through the site on the northern and western sides of the site. The land is gently sloping, with a vast majority of the site falling from southeast to northwest, with a very gentle fall inland from the farm towards the eastern corner of the site. The context of the site includes industrial and commercial development immediately beyond the A5. Within the site are the farmhouse, bungalow and agricultural buildings associated with Patchell Farm, which are proposed to be demolished. This shows the illustrative site layout plan. The access is from the existing access on the A5, which would be upgraded. Footpath connections are also provided. 5 units of varying scales are provided, and parameters would be conditioned for units 2 to 4. Detailed permission is sought for Unit 1, which is the largest B8 unit and has an intended occupier. Landscape buffers surrounding the site equate to approximately 49% of the whole site. Landscaping screening would be provided within these buffers to include earthworks and bunding. Over 10,000 new native trees and woodland plants would be planted, and over 25,000 new other plants would also be planted. This is the site layout plan for Unit 1, which they are seeking full permission for. It's approximately 200 metres from the A5 and would have a maximum height of 18 metres. The floor space proposed is approximately 56,000 square metres of B8 floor space. There is service yards on both sides, and a staff and visitor car park is provided to the front of the site near the A5. This unit would accommodate approximately 800 jobs. This shows the proposed elevations and sections of Unit 1. As you can see, there's HGV service yards on both of the south-east and south-west elevations. The office block is proposed to the front of the site. The materials would be secured through a condition, however the building would be banded, as you can see within the elevations. This is seen within various other employment developments along the A5, for example, Magna Park. Since the publication of the committee report, a sustainability checklist has been submitted in line with the Climate Change and Sustainable Design and Construction Supplementary Planning document. This is considered to be acceptable. In terms of the principle, Section 8 of the committee report sets this out, and it considers the location, employment need and alternative sites. The site is located on the edge of the Rugby administrative area within the countryside. The proposals are contrary to policies GP2 and ED3 of the local plan, based on the conflict with the spatial strategy. Therefore, the proposals need to demonstrate that the overall benefits outweigh the harm. In terms of greenbelt, there is a minor part of the development within the greenbelt. This is only the drainage works associated with the A5 works, and therefore is considered to be an engineering operation and is acceptable. In terms of land designation and use, Section 10 of the committee report sets out that there would be a loss of average quality agricultural land, and there would also be some loss of grade 3A agricultural land. This harm will be weighed within the planning balance. In terms of the character and design, there's been parameters that have been set out for the outline, and detailed design of Unit 1 has been considered as set out within Section 11 of the committee report. The proposal is adjacent to both Nuneaton and Hinckley's built development, and given the extensive landscaping, the character of the area, and the proposal would comply with policy. Residential amenity has been considered within Section 13 of the committee report. The proposals would be a significant distance away from any neighbouring dwellings, and therefore it is considered there would be no materially adverse impact upon residential amenity of the occupiers of any nearby dwellings. As mentioned, the application was previously proposed for refusal in relation to highways grounds. Both Warwickshire County Council, Leicestershire County Council and National Highways have all considered the application, and all outstanding issues have been resolved. There is no objections from any of the highway authorities. The proposed parking for Unit 1 is considered to be acceptable. In relation to the reason for refusal that related to safe and suitable access for all users, it has been overcome as additional footpaths to the north and west have been either conditioned or secured through the Section 106. A wayfinding scheme has also been proposed. In relation to the second reason for refusal, it related to the impact upon the transport network. Additional information has been submitted in relation to the modelling. This also included additional sensitivity testing for the HGVs along the A5, and this resolved any outstanding issues that the highways authorities had. Therefore, it's considered that the application complies with all highways policies. In relation to landscape and visual impact, Section 12 of the committee report sets out that extensive landscaping is proposed. However, as it is a greenfield site, there would be urbanisation of the site, and there would be a moderate/major adverse landscape effect. This harm will be weighed within the planning balance. In relation to planning obligations, there have been two requests. There's been biodiversity and net gain and management requests from ecology, and also safeguarding of the land adjacent to the A5, which would be safeguarding for 20 years, and footpath connections as mentioned previously to the west. There has been no detrimental impacts identified for pollution, trees and hedgerows, ecology, flood risk, heritage or archaeology. In relation to the planning balance, Section 23 details that there has been harm identified in terms of the proposal being contrary to the spatial strategy, the loss of agricultural land, and the urbanisation of the site, therefore the landscape harm. In terms of benefits, there will be economic benefits in terms of job creation, contribution to local centres and business rates. The social benefits relate to job security linked to health and wellbeing. Environmental benefits relate to landscaping, pedestrian linkages, electric vehicle charging points and sustainable urban drainage systems. In addition, the A5 carriageway lowering under the railway bridge would be a significant benefit of the scheme. On balance, it is considered that the identified benefits outweigh the identified harm, and therefore the application is recommended for approval in accordance with the agenda.
Yes, those councillors that were here in November, there was quite a considerable amount of debate on that, and those points that were raised at that meeting, I believe have been addressed. Councillor Willis, did you want to?
It was just, and thank you, Ella, thank you for excellent report again, and clarifying. Chair, Ella, when we sat in November, it was very much aligning, getting the ducks, if you like, in a row. are we assured now that all those ducks are, or is there any loose end that we need to just tie up time-wise, just to be so we're crystal clear, 100% sure when we move to the decision?
No, all high-rise matters has been resolved. There's been ongoing communication with the applicant, all three high-rise authorities and myself for the last several months. So no, everything has now been resolved and has either been secured through a condition or will be secured through a Section 106. The only thing I would point out is that as this is a cross-boundary application, not all of the high-rise conditions will be imposed on Rugby's decision, because the A5 obviously lies within Leicestershire, and for conditions that only relate to Hinckley and Bosworth area, they will be imposing those. But they have published their committee report, and I can confirm that those conditions are within that report.
Thank you. So we are safe to move to decision. Chair, is it too early to move for approval in line with officer's report?
No, I think we've had a really good debate in November, so please move.
In which case I move approval in line with the officer's recommendations.
Councillor Daly next.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Ella, again for the detailed report. Yeah, we had a very lengthy discussion about this in November. It sounds like all of our concerns have been addressed. So yeah, I'm happy to support Councillor Willis's move for approval.
Thank you. We've got Councillor Lawrence next.
Thank you very much for the report. Since we last met, we had quite a lot of training on biodiversity and things like that. So I do wonder whether Informative 2 could actually be increased and actually start mentioning biodiversity and the need to actually not just plant trees that grow quickly, but actually make sure those trees really are sustainable for the environment.
Yes, so we could add biodiversity into that. However, biodiversity has been considered separately. So in terms of biodiversity, it will be included within the Section 106. So obviously there's the additional tree planting and landscaping around the site. However, there's additional land outside of the red line that the applicant has control over that will actually consider most of the biodiversity offsetting.
Apologies, our concern is not the planting of trees, it's the type of trees that are planted. Okay, so it's biodiversity in terms of what it maximises the environment, not just does something. You see what I mean?
Yeah, no, that's fine. So Informative 2 does set out that it's the specification, but then it does relate to, let me just find the condition.
I think, let's not get too hung up on Informative 2. What I would like is that there is an informative in there to increase biodiversity and be explicit about that.
We've noted
and I'd
that.
be happy for the officers to word something on that.
Yeah.
Okay,
Can I support Councillor Lawrence's proposal there? There has been some updating it on biodiversity. There is also some regional policy that overlaps all of it, which crosses county and local authority boundaries. So it's important that any informative recognises that the updates in biodiversity and the cross-border requirements.
Councillor Lewis.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report and so on is excellent. Just a bit of information, really. One of the advantages we're given is that there's an income from business rates of £2 million per annum. Would that come wholly to Rugby, or is it shared between the three authorities? And if it is shared, how much do we get?
It would come wholly to Rugby, as all of the built development is within Rugby. It's only the landscaping in Nuneaton and the access and landscaping in Hinckley, so we would get all of the benefit of that.
Thank you.
Right, we've had a proposer and a seconder for... Yeah, we just need to check that the proposer and the seconder are happy with the additional informative.
Thank you, Chair. Yes.
Yes, that's fine, Chair.
Okay, so we've had a proposer and seconder for approval with that additional informative. All those in favour, please show. That's unanimous, isn't it? So that's unanimous. That is approved.
Just before we move into item 3 and 4, which both have ward councillors speaking on them, just a reminder for the benefit of both ward councillors, Councillor Harrington and Councillor Moran, once the public speaking element of the presentation is over and before we move into debate, I will ask both of you to leave the chamber and I will retrieve you at the end of the debate. Thank you.
So we've got land west side of Heritage Close, Corston next, and Lucy Davison is going to present.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so application R22/0386 is for the erection of 10 dwellings with access from Heritage Close. And on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see the red line boundary of the application. I have then presented the Google Earth view and have drawn in red for members the outline of the site. Then some site photographs to, this doesn't show, but the roadway that is shown there is the access to Heritage Close with the community centre further on the right, and then we have the site with the wooden post and rail fencing. The site is currently vacant with only self-setting vegetation currently present. Moving then to the end of Churchill Walk, this is moving then to the next point of the site, and then we have the public footpath towards the Coston open space area. Moving along that to the next boundary of the site, looking towards the shops and the dwellings that are opposite on Gerard Road, and then finally to the fourth boundary of the site, looking back towards the houses on the opposite at Judith Way. Here we have both the existing and the proposed layout plan. In the proposal before members this evening, the 10 dwellings are proposed in 3 blocks. We have one block of 4, and then the 2 other blocks consist of 3 dwellings. In total of the 10 dwellings, there are 4 4-bedroom properties and then 6 3-bedroom dwellings, each with their own private rear garden with car parking spaces and also storage for cycle and bins provided. Here we have block 1. This is the one closest to Gerard Road. It includes 2 4-bedroom properties with 3-bedroom properties between those. We've been provided with elevations in terms of materials. These are proposed to be conditioned and then will be decided at a later date, subject to any permission being granted. Again, then block 2 is the middle block, with block 3 that closest to the Coston open space area. In terms of the key considerations, the application site, in line with policy GP2 of the local plan, is located in Rugby town. The site isn't currently under any allocations and is within an area that is the main focus of development in the Borough in the most sustainable location. In terms of the character and appearance of the layout and design, it is considered that this has been addressed in line with that of the area, taking on features that are currently present and with the dwellings being presented facing towards the public space, which or the public footpath, which follows along from those that are on Churchill and continuing that feature. In terms of residential amenity, there was objections received in relation to the proposal. Now, these are from within the wider Coston area, but not the residents closest to the site. The comments that have been raised have been considered. However, it is felt that there's a satisfactory separation distance between the proposed dwellings and those that are currently existing. In terms of policy SDC1, there is also the off-street storage for wheeled bins provided in line with that policy. In terms of highways and car parking, Warwickshire County Council Highways Department have no objection to the scheme. In line with both the 4 and 3 bed properties, each dwelling is provided with sufficient car parking provision in line with that of policy D2 and Appendix 5 of the local plan. There is also provision for cycle parking and storage at each dwelling, and each of the 10 dwellings will receive or be provided with their own electric car charging point. In terms of ecology, a preliminary ecological appraisal and biodiversity impact assessment has been carried out. This does identify a loss on the site, and due to the constraints, it isn't considered that this can be provided for within the on-site provision, and therefore it is proposed that this would be addressed through a Section 106 agreement and an off-site contribution. Other matters such as flooding, air quality, ecology and landscaping are all considered to be suitably addressed within the proposal and with the conditions that are provided in the draft decision. In terms of the obligations, as previously stated, it is proposed for the biodiversity agreement for an off-site contribution, and in line with policy HS4, as the proposal includes 10 dwellings, there would also be an open space contribution provided. In terms of the proposal, it is considered that there is the economic benefits with the construction, with additional council tax and also additional residents into the borough. Socially, it provides to the housing needs of the borough by increasing the number of properties that we have provided for residents. And whilst there is the identified loss of biodiversity on the site, it is considered that all other environmental issues can be addressed, and therefore on balance the recommendation is for the approval of the scheme in line with the conditions and informatives and completion of the legal agreement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Have we got any points of clarification to the officer?
Just on biodiversity, Chair, that can't be met on site, will it be met nearby?
It would be within the borough, but in terms of the exact location, that would be considered through the processing and agreement of the Section 106. So I don't have an exact location at this stage.
So it couldn't be achieved, say, near to Corston Greenway, for example?
It would potentially be a possibility, but I couldn't specifically say tonight where it would go.
Councillor Daly.
Thank you. Thanks again for the report. Just a quick question. There were 22 neighbour objections. Did you say in your presentation that none of those objections were from the houses that immediately neighboured this bit of land?
That's correct. That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got no more speakers. Then no more questions from the members. We'll move on to what we got. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. I just asked one question. The bin storage area, it's quite a long way from some of the houses for people to drag their bins. It's very useful for the team picking up the bins. And there could be up to, 20 bins if it's a two bin collection. Is there enough room in there on that area? It didn't look very large, but presumably that's been looked into.
Yeah, it has been assessed by our waste services team and they've raised no objection.
Okay.
We've got some speakers on this, so we've got Councillor Richard Bishop, who's the from Corston Parish Council. There was a long time ago when we read out the rules, wasn't it? But you've got 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, councillors, for the opportunity to speak on behalf of Corston Parish Council and on behalf of the many residents who have contacted us about this application. As a reminder, we have, as Corston Parish Council, objected to the application on the grounds of safety around the original layout of the houses, the reduced visibility for motorists on the Gerard Road Island crossing, which was pictured earlier, which is often used by children while accessing the bridleway there. On the ecology of the site, which has been mentioned, the site has been a haven for wildlife and would be a sad loss of green space in Corston. The density of the properties are not in keeping with those that are nearby along Gerard Road and actually become quite close to Gerard Road as well. And in parking, we think the development will increase traffic and parking in an area that's already busy because of the close proximity to shops, community centre and the primary school. Now, some of those have, since our initial objection, been addressed, but on behalf of the Parish Council and the residents, we still have questions over the sale and purchase of the land, and the optics of this do not look good. While the sale, purchase and submission of the planning application may have followed the due legal process, there are still unanswered questions, and the community itself desires the land to be used for a more community-based purpose. And ask the committee to consider the optics of this. Does this offer Corston a positive use for this land? And with the speed and nature of the sale initial application and with the involvement of sitting county councillors in the development, does this look like a deal conducted behind closed doors and waved through? Until all the questions have been answered that the community have raised, we'd ask the committee to reject this application in its current form and ask the new landowner to engage better with the community to consider answering some of the community's actual needs before submitting a future application. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a couple of points of clarification for the committee's benefit. Just a reminder that the applicant's motives, personal conduct or history or the property rights relating to that particular piece of land, including its sale and purchase history, are not relevant material planning considerations.
Further points to the Speaker? Councillor Willis and then Councillor Daly.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Just for clarification, you're not against this site being developed for some purpose or other?
Correct, yes.
So if it wasn't housing, you'd be happy for it to be something else that was a community use?
So when the initial houses on the Corston site were sold, it was sold on the basis that that land was going to be for community use. A doctor's surgery was spoken about, a pub was spoken about. The land has then lay empty for many, many years and has now been sold for housing development.
Okay. I'm just thinking of the highways issue, notwithstanding highways haven't objected. Wouldn't those issues still remain if those alternative developments came forward?
If it's a community purpose, there would be a reason to walk to that area from across Corston, as we find with the school, as we find with the community hall. It wouldn't necessarily involve extra traffic.
Okay, thank you.
Just again for the benefit of members, 2 points raised by Councillor Bishop. So the first one in relation to kind of other potential uses for the site, they are not a material planning consideration, they're speculations only, so we're just concentrating on the fact this is in for residential development and not to get sidetracked on that. And Councillor Bishop has raised the point about when the original development was granted permission about that land being put aside for community uses. So back in 1998 there was a Section 106 agreement that went alongside the original development that safeguarded that land for a period of time for certain uses, some of which have come forward, some of which have not, and they included reference to a GP surgery. However, that obligation only required the land to be safeguarded for a certain period of time, subject to some requirements around marketing, etc. That obligation lapsed in 2008 and no longer runs with that land. That land is no longer safeguarded for community purposes and can be brought forward essentially for any development, as it's considered white land as far as we're concerned.
Councillor Daly, point of clarification.
Yes, I was going to ask Councillor Bishop. I was going to actually refer to what Sarah has just said. So, I'm just looking here at the Section 106 agreement from the 90s, and it talks about doctor's surgery, but it also talks about the possibility of a public house. I was going to ask you whether you prefer 10 houses or a massive Hungry Horse pub. However, I think Sarah has made it quite clear that that's not a material planning concern, so I'm not going to ask that.
We've got two questions coming up. We've got Councillor Sanderson and then Councillor Slinger.
Thank you, Chair. My question to the Parish Councillor. I note in both the comments that we've got here before us and the comments from your Parish Council that you are very concerned about the loss of habitat for wildlife within that area. Clearly, if we put an informative on this that really argue for that habitat, would there be community buying in terms of maintaining it?
The Parish Council has already looked at some rewilding areas in some of the open spaces around Corston, so I'm sure there would be community buy-in for that. I think point to earlier, one of the questions was around the location of that section 106. I think the nearer to the site, the better, rather than distributing it across the borough.
On the basis it's very hard. Animals do not relocate easily.
Councillor Slinger.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Bishop. Could you tell me 2 points? Could you tell me first why the density point do you think residents have particular issues with that? And on the my second point is around, Chair, you may not rule this in order, but let me have a go. Are you, as a community and as a parish council, currently in communication with various authorities around alternative uses, and is that process finished? But the first point about the density is also an important one for me.
So on point 1, it comes down to it not in keeping with properties nearby. Obviously, as we mentioned, they have not objected directly, but it doesn't feel like it fits into that space. And there's also the issue of the additional traffic and footfall that will raise up in addition to what it would be as a community space. I'm not too sure point 2 is allowed to be spoken about, but I'll go for it anyway. I think there's lots that we would want in Corston and lots of community spaces. We as a parish council did reach out to the original landowners at various different points to make representation that we would be interested in buying the space. We never received anything back. And so the deadline may have expired, but it wasn't for want of trying.
We've got Councillor Mrs Roberts.
I was going to ask about the biodiversity, if it was going to be considered spaces closer rather than taking it far away, but I think you've answered that question. Thank you.
We'll move on to the next speaker then. This is the agent, Mr Richard Cook. You've got 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Yes, yeah, I represent the applicant here this evening. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak in support of the proposals. We welcome the officer report and recommendation for approval. The applicant has worked closely with officers since the application was submitted, has met all requests for additional information and has amended the proposal significantly from their originally submitted scheme following comments received. I think as the report sets out, the site was initially reserved for the neighbourhood centre when permission for the estate was first granted in 1998. After a lengthy marketing process by the then developer, which looked at doctor's surgery, public house and shopping centre, we've heard that the requirement or the reservation on the site lapsed back in 2008, which was some 15 years ago now. The applicant has a long involvement in the area and developed the local neighbourhood centre that stands in Corston today, supporting it financially as it became established. They bought the application site in 2019 and went on to explore different options to expand the neighbourhood centre, which was their preference, even though the legal obligation for them to do so had long since lapsed. So their approaches to pub companies, to community service operators were not successful. They looked at alternative retail proposals, but I think given their involvement in developing the neighbourhood centre, were keen to ensure that trade wasn't diluted for the independent businesses that existed there. They made an approach to the Primary Care Trust in 2019, but the site was declined. The offer put forward was for a health centre, but it wasn't taken up. The applicant has explained the reasons for the residential scheme at a public meeting by invitation by Councillor Moran in May 2022. And at that meeting, they made an offer to the local community of a 6-month window where they wouldn't develop the site, even if permission were granted the next day, to give the community and the parish council the chance to explore alternative uses. But they haven't received any approaches since then, which was 8 months since, and no alternative schemes have been forthcoming. So I suppose the extensive marketing that's been undertaken so far shows that residential is a viable use for the site and the location is suitable. I think in terms of the application itself, it picks up and addresses all of the technical reasons. There's no objection from the local highway authority. The access has been through a road safety audit. The ecology survey found that the habitats present at the site were common and widespread, and the financial contribution that's sought is basically to secure compliance with policies around net gain rather than to mitigate for any loss. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Just on that nicely. Points of clarification. Councillor Willis.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Cook. Talking of community uses, etc., has the ACV, the Asset Community Value Process, been put in place at any point? Has the site been offered as an ACV?
Not to my knowledge. I think the approaches that the applicant has made has been to sort of individual operators and developers. It's not been sort of put forward through that particular mechanism.
And could that be considered?
I think I'd say that the application, I think the applicant's been through the process and has arrived at residential as the best use of the site. I think, yeah, that's the proposal that's here at the moment. There was obviously a discussion and an offer to consider alternative uses. That's sort of separate in a matter for the applicant rather than this application.
It really was just for the clarity, because some of what you were saying seemed to be heading in that direction, and it was just whether you'd actually reached that point. So thank you very much, Mr. Cook.
Yes.
Just on the asset of community value point, I can confirm it's not on our register currently. We would usually expect the application for an asset of community value to come through the community group or the parish council rather than the applicant itself, because it's for the benefit of the community that the restriction is placed on the title. So that's where we'd usually expect those kind of applications to come through. And there are certain thresholds they have to pass, which may or may not be appropriate for this particular site.
Thank you for the clarification.
Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. To the applicant's agent. We've all learnt a lot since COVID, that the importance of publicly accessible open spaces. And it seems the parish council wants a publicly accessible open space to be of community benefit. Would you as the agent, on behalf of the applicant, look at this if we put an informative on this application to look for that site of community benefit?
Again, I'd probably just point to the applicant's been through a process of looking at alternative uses for the site. It's not publicly accessible open space at the moment. There is open space.
I'm saying off-site, not necessarily on-site.
In the sense of a contribution.
Nearby field would do nicely.
Applicant isn't here. I can't speak.
Through you, Chair, the Section 106 already makes provision for an open space contribution should the development be approved. So that would take care of mitigating any loss of public open space or perceived loss of open space for the purposes of the residential development.
They should be within the locality of the new development.
Okay, that point's noted. Right, have we got any further points of clarification from members? No? Okay. Right, then we'll move on then to Councillor Moran, who's going to speak.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good evening, councillors. Thank you for your time. Concerned it's been a long evening already. I'll be as quick as I can. Firstly, the process here that underpins the policy. Every household in Corston was told when purchased their properties that this subject field was earmarked for community use. That's its position in the original planning documents for the estate, and for over 20 years until this planning application landed, nobody knew otherwise. This site was never included in the local plan, any other consultation. The applicant did not take part in any pre-app consultation. Residents had no involvement in the site's designation, nor has the parish council. That's a democratic deficit. And there's probably the heart of why we've had so much complaint received. As you see in the officer's report, there is a planning clause known as a sunset clause, which was supposedly to safeguard the community use. There's a basic flaw in this logic, which is why these clauses are never used these days. The owner had to market the site at open market value, except, of course, residential in the centre of Corston will always be significantly higher than any other community use. So a private company acting in the interests of its shareholders is never going to accept a lesser value. Except we don't know. I formally requested the documents to see proof the council received of marketing, and I've been told that they don't exist. I don't think that's right. How can I represent my residents or you discharge your democratic duties if there's an absence of proof that consultation or marketing ever took place? This takes me to my second point. The Corston Master Plan of 20 years ago never envisaged dense housing in this site. As a borough, we are more than meeting government targets for new development. We have a full 5-year land supply. And when is enough enough? When do we consider the amenity of existing residents? Specifically, there is a loss of open space here. The NPPF is clear that open space does not have to be formally designated to constitute a positive amenity. Paragraph 99 of the NPPF is clear that open space should not be built on unless an assessment has been undertaken. There is no reference to that assessment in the officer's report. Secondly, the loss of biodiversity is significant. The only survey work was done on a single day in November 21. The report itself states that November is not an optimal time of year. The officer's report states that the loss cannot be remediated on site. Well, no, of course it can, because the density is so high. On both matters, there is an absence of proper assessment and an acceptance of a material loss on site. All this can be addressed by off-site payment, can it? Well no. Paragraph 180D of the NPPF says biodiversity in particular should be a positive and net gain. Look, rugby is expanding day on day, and there has to be a line for the quality of schemes permitted within the framework. They should add to the fabric of our town, not take away. These are the reasons it should be rejected.
Thank you for that. Points of clarification. Councillor Willis, can we just hang on until our legal Sarah's spoken? Thanks.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Moran. Just one point of clarification around the point you raised about the safeguarding of land. This obligation fell away in 2008. It was deemed to have been complied with in 2008 by officers who assessed it at the time. That record of that assessment, in terms of the decision that the obligation had been complied with and could be released, we do retain. The supporting evidence and background documents we no longer keep, but given that it was 2008, 15 years ago, our document retention policy wouldn't ordinarily expect us to keep documents that long, and that's why we don't have them to hand.
Councillor Willis.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Moran. It's just really over the order of preference, I think, in terms that's been discussed. The community use, which I think was acceptable, so building was acceptable, notwithstanding the open space, and then moving to open space rather than residential housing development. Can I ask why the building, then to open space, rather than looking at alternative buildings?
Sorry, just to clarify, could you clarify the question in terms of what you're...
I think you were clear, and again, I'm happy to be corrected, that it was perfectly acceptable to the community to use the site for community use, GP surgery, whatever else that may be. And I think going back to the point I made to the councillor, but then my understanding is you've moved to open space rather than residential development. And we've seen photographs of what that open space currently looks like. Is that really the preferred choice?
Okay, sorry, I'll try and answer that as best I can. I think, I guess the answer is twofold, respectfully. I think I don't want to impart what I personally think should be on the site. I think the issue of a lack of consultation through any point as to what's good for the community is very apparent. And I think ultimately, as everything in life, there's probably some sort of compromise to be had. I think having 10 properties on that field is high density, and so there's no open space, there's no biodiversity benefit, and so it feels as if at the moment the cards are stacked too far in one side. That's all.
Thank you.
Councillor Daly.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Moran, for your words. Just a question: is the issue for you that 10 is too many? So, in your opinion, Councillor Moran, would maybe 6 or 8 houses be an acceptable number? You know, it would have a lesser impact on highways. It would maybe be a better design, in your opinion. Is there a point where you think that would be acceptable? Any kind of development on that land that would be acceptable?
I can answer that by, again, and I endorse what the applicant's agent said. We did have a public open meeting, and I think what I said at the time was that, again, I'd go back to, it's about a consultation to understand the community's desire and what the community would like to see. I think, therefore, a lesser number of buildings on the site would give opportunity for a greater spread of uses, and perhaps it wouldn't be quite so fulsome, and that there could be some positive open space, there could be some positive biodiversity. All of those things could be allowed. That's all.
Okay, I think we've got Councillor Slinger.
Thank you, Councillor Moran. Could you clarify the point you were making about the respective value of the land? So if the land is deemed available for community building of some kind or shops versus resi, could you just clarify that, if you're able to, without breaching or going into commercial?
I'm happy to. I think it's relevant, because I think in our current policies that we enact on large schemes, this type of sunset clause where a developer is obliged to market but not accept, there is always going to be a move towards a higher value, and that's the developer's job. I'm a developer in my day job, and I think considering alternative uses is a slightly falsehood, because those alternative uses will never get the value of the primary use, which here is residential.
One more question, Councillor Sanderson.
My concern, Chair, is we are moving into a Dutch auction. We determine the planning application in front of us. We either accept it or we reject it. We don't do Dutch auctions.
Right, I think we've had enough of those questions, and we're going to move into debate, so I'm going to have to ask Councillor Moran if he'd leave the chamber, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, let's get the debate started. Who would like to start for us? Remember, we're looking at the planning application before us, not anything in the sky somewhere, or... Yep. Councillor Mrs Brown.
Yes. Big mouth strikes again. I'll start. Okay, so I represent one of the highest density wards, urban wards in Rugby, and I'm really aware of the value that there is in any kind of open space where it's high density like that. And I came with a really open mind, and I've listened very carefully to what's been said. I am mostly concerned about the objections by residents who, their opinion was formed by, most of them, formed by what they were promised when they actually bought their properties. And I know at the minute it is not the most cosmetic bit of open space in the world, I admit that, but it is an open space and it has got a potential there to be developed as something that is an asset for the community, and I think that's what people bought into. We've seen in all of our urban wards developments that are just row upon row upon row of houses with very little space in between, with very little greenery. I think it would be a shame if estates were being developed currently followed that pattern, and we should cherish the open space that we've got.
Councillor Willis.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on Councillor Brown's point on open space, yes, we do want to maintain our open spaces, but my understanding that this was never intended to be a long-term open space. It was there for community use, and I have learnt something new tonight in terms of the Dutch auction and the price coming down until you get something somebody's happy with, and I think it's a point well made by Councillor Sanderson in terms of that. But to refuse, I think, for the reason of open space could leave us open to a significant and costly challenge if we're not careful.
Councillor Daly.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I have great sympathy really with residents in Causton who may have bought their properties at the time, assuming this was going to become a doctor's surgery or a public house, as was explained in the original master plan. However, at the moment, I don't feel comfortable that we have a completely solid reason for refusal. It may be, if my mind can be turned on that, I'd be willing to consider that. But Councillor Willis is kind of taking the words out of my mouth that there is a risk here that if we haven't got solid grounds for refusal, we could be, as a council, could be liable for any decision by the applicant to appeal our decision tonight. So I'm really interested to hear what other colleagues on this committee say or have to say about that, particularly in regard to the losing the open space.
Through you, Chair, just one thing that I could point out, and in terms of the open space for the Causton area, as you can see here on the Google Street View, I hope this is, we can't actually see my pointer, I believe, but I'll try my best to describe it for you. Obviously, within the red line boundary that I've put on this plan is the site. On the right-hand side, you can hopefully read Causton Community Hall, and then we also have the shops with the fish and chip shop is shown there, sort of on the right-hand side of the site. If you look then directly to the north, sort of left-hand side, you can see there it's the Causton Play area. So that is the protected open space area. So that's just to guide you in the proximity to how close these dwellings are and to the part of the overall open space that is currently provided and protected within the area. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Slinger.
Thank you, Chair. I must say that I remain concerned that the views of the local community have not been taken into due consideration, and that remains my principal concern about this application. We really need to give more weight in our considerations to the views of a parish council, to the views of residents, the people who are going to live there. I think their views have not been given sufficient weight, and I will, over the coming seconds and minutes, decide on whether to move a motion to reject. But those are my concerns. To your point, Councillor Daly, my primary concern.
Councillor Willis.
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Slinger makes a hugely valid point and probably something that all of us within the Chamber subscribe to, and that is the views of the community. I think if we had a neighbourhood plan in front of us, of course, and I don't know if there are plans for that, and the community views on what the site would be used for, I think would again lend power to the argument that has just been so eloquently outlined by Councillor Slinger. But we don't. And we are in the position where we are. And with no neighbourhood plan in place, no alternative proposal for the community use in sight, as far as I understand it, I am minded to move for approval.
Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. I think having that drawing up there is quite helpful. It clearly shows that there is land nearby which could produce a viable habitat environment. As I said earlier, species do not relocate easily. In fact, in many instances, planning has learned they don't relocate at all, they just die off. So looking at a site locally, working with our open spaces team and Sustrans, I think there could be a viable solution. But we need to reflect that in the informative that we put on this application tonight, because I think that will help both the parish council, the community and our open spaces team to what they would look to develop within that locality to the betterment of the local community. So I would sort of ask that is put into an informative, Chair.
So through you, Chair, biodiversity is dealt with in the Section 106, so it would be more appropriate to include it within the Section 106 clauses rather than informative. But yeah, that is noted and will be within the office's negotiations.
So with that, Councillor Sanders, are you going to second the approval?
I think we're going to get to a solution on this one. So I think this is the most practical thing. We can't negotiate this tonight about how many properties there should and shouldn't be on the site. We can only go by the application that's in front of us.
Okay, Councillor Roberts, Mrs. Roberts, who's far away?
Okay, just, I don't know if that's acceptable or not. However, if this plan gets approved today, can we sort of add a little condition or something that make the work of the 106 money for the biodiversity go parallel with the construction so that the community does not feel like they've been robbed of their space and they can see something happening for them?
So through you, Chair, the trigger for when the biodiversity is required is a county council point. We can put that to them, but that's a point for them to negotiate as our statutory consultee. It's also worth pointing out that the Section 106 also includes a contribution to improving open space for the open space area that the planning officer has recently pointed out. And again, we can negotiate the triggers on that to try and bring them forward as early as possible for the reasons outlined by Councillor Roberts. So we'll certainly pick that up in the negotiations.
Councillor Slinger.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Given that we're in a fiscal environment that's pretty challenging and that's likely to continue, today's budget day, aren't we, to some extent, setting a precedent that when new developments have parcels of land allocated like this, unless some community or alternative provision can be achieved, they will automatically, through the fact that residential developments tend to be worth more, they will almost automatically default to a residential solution. So this is something that concerns me, and I think colleagues should be concerned about that as we build increasingly into green or green/brownfield sites.
Yeah, through you, Chair. I mean, obviously, when we look at the reviewing the local plan, or if a neighbourhood plan comes forward, then obviously that is the time to look at particular sites and potentially, designating sites for certain types of use. Obviously, in this particular case, the original permission dates back quite some many years. So there has been quite a passage of time, and obviously the site hasn't, come forward for whatever reason. For perhaps the community use that was initially envisaged, and obviously we are now here today looking at the an application for residential. But obviously, yeah, there is a plan process which does designate sites. So, for example, I understand that the open space to the north that Lucy pointed out is obviously a protected open space in the local plan.
Okay, we've had a proposer and a seconder for approval. We're going to put that to the... So, yes, yeah. We're going to put that to the vote. All those in favour of approving that application, please show. Hands up, please. And those against? So that was 8 for approval and 4 against. So that application has been approved. Thank you. I do hope everybody's brought their flasks and sandwiches. After the next one, we'll have a 5-minute break. Okay. Well, right, we'll have a break now for what, 10 minutes? Okay.